Welcome, dear listener. This is Sebastian Nothwell, here today to give you a special sneak peek into the Oak King Holly King audiobook, narrated by Gary Furlong. If you're just tuning in, we're on the 6th chapter of a gay Victorian romantasy, wherein a fearsome fey warrior destined for ritual sacrifice seeks a mortal clerk fated to save him. Enjoy!
Chapter 6. Shrike could hardly fail to notice the clerk's growing interest. He'd taken him to join the wild hunt, not just to prove the truth of his claims, but likewise to prove his own martial skill, and convince Lofthouse that, with his patronage, he was more than capable of achieving victory against the Holly King. Now, with Lofthaus's arms wrapped around his waist like a second armoured girdle, and the clerk's rigid interest thrust against his backside with every leap of the stag beneath them both, Shrike felt confident he'd surpassed his aim. London had quieted considerably by the hour of their return to Hyde Park. The stag trotted to a halt beneath Achilles. Shrike slipped from its back and held out his arm to assist the clerk in following him down. No sooner had Lofthouse dismounted than he shrugged off Shrike's rabbit fur cloak and returned it to him. Shrike had admired the way his cloak looked with its furred bulk wrapped around the clerk's narrow shoulders. He felt almost sorry to have it returned. He resolved to fashion something like it for Lofthouse, amongst other things. 1,000 trinkets this mortal might have if he could help Shrike survive the coming solstice. 1,000 more if he found Shrike as compelling as Shrike found him. Lofthouse's evident cockstand on the path back to London seemed a promising indication, but it wasn't enough to merely possess desire. One must act on desire if one wished to achieve its prize, and for that Shrike had patience enough to wait. "You've convinced me," said Lofthouse. Shrike allowed himself a victorious smile. "I'll do what I can to assist you," Lofthouse continued, much to Shrike's satisfaction, "though I know not how I might. For the moment, however, I must return to Staple Inn and to work in the morning. But if you would do me the honour of meeting me at the office after Mr. Grigsby departs for the evening?" "Aye," Shrike readily agreed. Despite the fog hanging over the city, the clerk's eyes shone bright with excitement equal to Shrike's own, as if reflecting stars to match the constellations of freckles scattered across his sharp features. The ones on his curiously soft lips, in particular, drew Shrike's eye. Lofthouse, gazing up at Shrike in turn, looked as if his mind entertained similar thoughts. For a moment, Shrike expected his idle desire might become decisive action. But then a slight shudder ran through the clerk's frame, and with nothing more than a polite smile, he turned away, and with a few swift strides, vanished into the fog. A delicate tapping sound roused Wren from dreams of wild woods and wilder company. He opened his eyes to find himself in bed. The tapping sound persisted. Wren rubbed the last remnants of his dreams out of his eyes with the heel of his hand. He blinked stupidly at his room for a moment before he realized the tapping came from the door. The fog swirling past his window had bloomed full white with the risen sun. The fey hunt had been but a dream, and worse yet, it had kept him abed well past his usual pre-dawn waking hour. And in the meantime, someone had not only got into the office, but up the stair to Wren's garret to tap upon his chamber door. He felt sure he'd locked up last night, and as only one person besides himself held a key, Wren's heart plunged into his stomach, the horror of his situation like a bucket of ice water upended over his head. He leapt out of bed and ran to the door, stopping just short of opening it, as he realized he wore only his nightshirt. He cleared his throat of its waking rasp and called out, "Good morning, Mr. Grigsby." "Oh," Mr. Grigsby replied from the other side of the door. The tapping ceased. "Good morning, Lofthouse. Not ill, I hope?" As always, no trace of sarcasm or ill humour entered into Mr. Grigsby's speech. Though considering his useless clerk had overslept by several hours and forced him to open up his own office, Wren thought him well entitled to a hint of exasperation at least. Wren withheld a sigh, and recited the falsehood Mr. Grigsby had so obligingly laid out for him. "A touch out of sorts, sir, but I shall be downstairs shortly, and I'm very glad to hear it," said Mr. Grigsby, the only man in all of London who could utter the phrase with sincerity and conviction. "Though, of course, if you're feeling poorly, perhaps you'd better stay and rest. Should I send for a physician?" "No need, sir." Wren hurried to dissuade him before the notion could take root. "I'm feeling much better already, thank you. Splendid. But don't overexert yourself in rushing down, Lofthouse. I can manage well enough for the moment. Good morning." And with that, Mr. Grigsby finally retreated downstairs. Wren waited until the last audible footstep had echoed away into the muffled silence of Staple Inn. Only then did he collapse with his forehead against the door and give voice to a long-suffering groan. His dream had exhilarated him in the moment. Now, when it had all faded into bitter dregs that served only to remind him of his tedious, ceaseless, inescapable reality, the memory exhausted him. Still, self-pity would change nothing. He forced himself upright from the door and staggered over to his washstand. Running his hand through his hair as he went, his fingers caught on the strands. Puzzled, he tried to pull his hand away. It stuck fast, and took 2 attempts to free himself, taking more than a few hairs with it as it went. They clung to his palm along with the unknown sticky substance. Some kind of resin, he thought as he squinted down at it. He saw not only his own chestnut hairs stuck there, but a few green needles as well. Pine pitch. Wren stared at his hand. There were no pines in London, much less in his garret. His dream was real. The wild hunt was real. Butcher was real. Wren sat down hard on his bed and spent entirely too many minutes staring at his hand. All Butcher spake of had been real, and furthermore he had promised to meet with Wren again on the morrow. And that morrow was today. This thought, more so than any thought about clerking or his duties towards Mr. Grigsby, spurred Wren to action. It took some time to wash all the pine pitch out of his hair, to say nothing of combing out the multitude of tangles. Fairy knots, Wren couldn't help thinking, nor could he keep from smiling at the thought. He felt giddy as a schoolboy, his mood today as ebullient as his master's every day, almost. It made him something of a dandy, for while he put on the same old black waistcoat, black frock coat, black trousers, and black neckcloth, having surrendered his white cravat to the werewolves, and wasn't that something to consider? He did so with more care, smoothing out creases and wrinkles, and picking out pine needles as he went, all of which did make him arrive downstairs rather later than he'd promised Mr. Grigsby. Late enough, in fact, for Mr. Grigsby to have already put his own kettle on and set a cup of tea cool enough to drink on Wren's desk. Despite this, Mr. Grigsby expressed only relief at Wren's entry. Wren thanked his employer for his concern and sat down at his desk. Actually buckling down to work, however, proved nigh on impossible. After the exhilaration of the wild hunt and with the promise of Butcher's return, Wren found it more difficult than ever before to settle into the mundane world of moving figures from one column to the next. A good man would strive to repay Mr. Grigsby for his consideration and lenience by accomplishing more in the workday. As Wren filled the margins of his memorandum book with scribblings of pine trees and satyrs, he supposed he'd never been a particularly good man. No sooner had Wren reached this conclusion than the downstairs bell rang. Wren leapt up from his desk before Mr. Grigsby could do more than open his mouth to request it of him. Mr. Grigsby's mouth remained open in astonishment as Wren dashed past his desk for the door. And well might Mr. Grigsby look astonished, for Wren didn't think he'd ever moved so rapidly in all his 10 years of service to the man. Wren paused at the door to catch his breath and give his nervous fingers one last dash through his hair. Then he took hold of the latch and swung the door inward with a very amiable and professional "Good morning." The figure on the stair was tall, dark, and broad-shouldered. But not Butcher. No feathered cap, no furred cloak, no highwayman's boots, no Venetian mask of black leather, just a practical pair of laced shoes, trousers, waistcoat, and morning coat, all in sober brown, with a modest blue necktie, the only spot of colour, and a soft crop of brown hair beneath a plain and practical beaver hat. The gentleman appeared to be in his early 40s, with a solid build beneath his suit and a strong jaw beneath his sideburns, and as he swept the beaver from his head, the eyes he turned up at Wren precisely matched the shade of his blue necktie. Wren caught himself before he let his face fall in disappointment. It wasn't the gentleman's fault, he wasn't Butcher after all. And as the gentleman reached the upper landing, Wren added, "How may I be of service, sir?" A modest smile lit up the gentleman's features. Sober he might be, but by no means grave. "Mr. John Tolhurst to see Mr. Grigsby, if he's in." Wren didn't have to glance back to know Mr. Grigsby was, in both the literal sense and the polite society definition of the phrase, in for the purpose of seeing visitors. Unlike some gentlemen of his profession, Mr. Grigsby delighted in entertaining strangers. And while Wren kept a wary eye out for temperance campaigners and tract leavers, this Tolhurst seemed like neither. Besides, the name Tolhurst had a familiar ring to it. Wren stepped back to allow the gentleman into the office, announcing as he did so, "Mr. Tolhurst, sir!" Mr. Grigsby had of course overheard everything that had passed in the doorway, but nevertheless he greeted the newcomer with all the merry enthusiasm of a country squire entertaining a guest in his manner. Tolhurst responded in kind with an indulgent smile, and accepted Mr. Grigsby's invitation to sit in Wren's chair. "I'm afraid I have some questions of a delicate nature," Tolhurst said with an apologetic glance at Wren. "You may trust my clerk with your life," Mr. Grigsby declared, before Wren could make a silent retreat from the office. Tolhurst relented with a chuckle. "Let us hope the stakes do not come to that. But yes, the subject is as dear to me as my own life. I must ask after my nephew, Mr. Felix Knoll," he added with another glance at Wren to show he spoke for his benefit. And there the final puzzle piece fell into place. Wren had read the name Tolhurst somewhere before, after all, in the last will and testament of Felix Knoll Sr., and on several financial documents pertaining to the case since then, though not many and not in recent years. The better clerk would have recognized the name from the start. Wren thought he deserved some leniency on account of Tolhurst being so unlike his nephew in every possible way, except for the eyes which Wren had to admit shared that same curious shade of blue. "I've heard tell of my nephew encountering some difficulty," Tolhurst continued. "A difficulty which he may have hoped to alleviate by visiting your office yesterday." "While I'm touched by your tender concern," said Mr. Grigsby, "I cannot divulge more than you've already heard, nor would I ever ask you to break your confidence," Tolhurst hastened to add. "However, I only wish to know, is his need dire? Does he require my assistance to save him from his perils? I'd ask him directly, but you know as well as I the pride of a young man. Felix is no different in his obstinate quest for independence. A direct question from me would embarrass him, and it might shatter his trust in me beyond repair if I should overstep." Wren tried very hard not to reflect on how Felix could piss away his annual allowance and still have concerned relations coming up out of the woodwork to look after him, like nursemaids tending a shrieking infant, while Wren himself could follow every rule save one and still find himself cast out on his arse. "On that account you may rest easy," said Mr. Grigsby with a comforting smile. "His difficulty is of the most minor sort, and will resolve itself with the coming of the new year." Tolhurst mirrored Mr. Grigsby's placid expression. "I'm most relieved to hear it." He hesitated, then added, "He said also that he attempted to draw on his trust and found it wanting." Mr. Grigsby's beatific smile altered not one jot. Tolhurst had the decency to look abashed. "Is there nothing that may be done to enable him to withdraw the funds he requires this quarter?" "I'm afraid not," Mr. Grigsby told him, not unkindly. "But again you may rest assured the need is not dire. I dare say he will laugh about it if you question him on the subject in a year or so." "As you say," Tolhurst replied with a laugh of his own. "Well do I remember my own foolish pursuits at his age, and how important they seemed to me then. Do forgive my interruption, Mr. Grigsby. I'll not intrude on your hospitality further. No, it's quite all right," he added, waving off Mr. Grigsby's offer of tea. "I'm sure you've much to do, and no doubt Mr—" He trailed off, looking to Wren with an expectant air. "Lofthouse," Wren supplied. "No doubt Mr. Lofthouse wishes me out of your hair." Tolhurst finished with a smile at Wren to show he meant no offence. "A pleasure to make your acquaintance, Mr. Lofthouse, and a pleasure to see you again, Mr. Grigsby." With that he donned his beaver hat, bid the pair of them good day, and showed himself out. While Mr. Grigsby might have wished Tolhurst could stay all afternoon, Wren didn't share in his sentiments, particularly not today of all days, when anticipation of what the evening would hold frayed his nerves to their absolute limit, though he supposed, as he returned to his desk, he ought to have thanked Tolhurst for breaking up the tedious hours till the workday's end. Despite Wren's hopes that Mr. Grigsby would take it into his head to dine early this evening, Mr. Grigsby departed at 8. Wren echoed his well wishes and locked up behind him. Then he put the kettle on, for perhaps Butcher, unlike Tolhurst, would care for some refreshment, and settled in to wait. 1 hour and 3 cups of tea later, Wren could no longer sit still. He got up to pace. From the window, by his desk, to the door, he could take 6 strides. From there to the back staircase that led up to his garret, another 4, and then 3 more strides returned him to his desk. An innumerable number of strides and several more cups of tea passed between the moment he began pacing and the moment the mantel clock struck 9. He tried sitting down at his desk again. Pen and paper occupied his hands, though his quaking fingers fumbled both, and his knee bounced with abandon. The rattle of the door latch at half past the hour sent Wren leaping to his feet, but it was only Mr. Grigsby returning from dinner. Wren gave a stiff smile as his employer bid him good night and headed up to his own rooms above the office. The moment Mr. Grigsby vanished upstairs, Wren returned to his desk with renewed fervour. By the time the clock struck 11, Wren had finished filling his margins with jousting squirrels and snails, and begun to wonder if something had happened to Butcher on the way to Mr. Grigsby's chambers. As the clock struck half past the hour, however, it occurred to Wren that perhaps Butcher didn't intend to visit him after all. The clock struck midnight. Wren conceded defeat. He blew out his candle and made for the stairs. As he ascended past Mr. Grigsby's door and continued on up to his garret, he scolded himself for acting such a fool, like a lovelorn schoolboy awaiting notice from a senior classmate. Stifling a yawn, he withdrew his key from his trouser pocket to unlock the door to his room. He opened the door to find a catastrophe. Hundreds of papers lay strewn about, blanketing the room in stark white spotted with the dark ink of Wren's pen strokes like coal-dusted snowfall after a blizzard, forming drifts and mounds of Wren's darkest secrets. The illumination of this tragedy came not from moonbeams or candlelight, but from a flickering blue glow the size of a matchstick flame in the cupped palm of a broad-shouldered, slender-waisted shadow sitting hunched on his bed, with still more papers filling the lap, and a sheaf held up in a fist before the face. Butcher.
This has been the 6th chapter of the Oak King Holly King audiobook, narrated by Gary Furlong. If you enjoyed what you heard today, you can find the full audiobook on Audible, Libro.fm, or quite possibly your local library through Libby or Hoopla. We'll be back next week with more Right Here, Right Queer. Until then, thank you for listening.